The sun-drenched surface of the pool rippled, reflecting the azure sky in perfect shimmering invitation. A languid afternoon, the kind where the world outside faded into a blissful hum. Then a sharp metallic crack split the air, unnatural, violent. The water exploded, a searing pain, a choked gasp. Through the ringing in his ears, a shrill, venomous whisper cut deeper than any shard. Indecency. The pristine white fence, once a symbol of quiet suburban peace, stood splintered, revealing a glimpse of manicured chaos, a glint of polished chrome, then the stark blue flash of police lights. The quiet cul-de-sac was about to learn that some fences protect more than just property lines. The summer sun beat down on Alex's backyard with a benevolent intensity, turning the turquoise water of his new pool into a dazzling, inviting sapphire. It was a recent acquisition, this sprawling, sun-drenched property in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a stark contrast to the cramped city apartment he'd inhabited for years. He'd poured every last cent, every ounce of his savings, into securing this slice of peace, a sanctuary where his creative spirit could unfurl under the open sky. As a sculptor, the solitude, the expansive outdoor space, and especially the privacy of his own pool were not mere luxuries. They were vital elements of his existence, fuel for his artistic soul. His current masterpiece, a series of abstract metal forms that twisted and spiraled like captured wind, was slowly taking shape in a corner of the yard, glinting under the afternoon sun. But for now, the work was paused. The heat was oppressive, clinging to the skin, demanding respite. With a sigh of pure contentment, Alex shucked off his swim trunks, letting them fall in a heap by the poolside. Nudity in his own backyard pool wasn't a defiant act. It was simply comfortable, natural, and, in his estimation, completely private. The old, weathered wooden fence separating his property from his next-door neighbor, Mrs. Agnes Henderson, might have been a bit rickety, but it was tall and seemed perfectly solid, offering a visual barrier he trusted implicitly. Mrs. Henderson. The very thought of her sent a faint, almost imperceptible shiver down his spine, even in the sweltering heat. She was, to put it mildly, a creature of habit and rigid adherence to unspoken rules. A retired elementary school principal, her very posture seemed to embody a perpetual state of disapproval. Her lawn was an unnatural carpet of emerald green, each blade trimmed to military precision. Her hedges were geometrical impossibilities. And her eyes. Alex had only caught them a few times, usually when he was bringing in his recycling bin a few hours after collection, or when a stray leaf from his oak tree dared to land on her immaculate pavement. Those eyes held a piercing, unblinking judgment that felt like a physical weight. He'd had a few low-key encounters with her since moving in 3 months ago. The first had been a terse good morning, delivered with the warmth of a glacier, when he'd waved from his porch. The second, a note slipped under his door, typed and devoid of any personal greeting, complaining about the unreasonable volume of ambient noise emanating from his property. The ambient noise had been the gentle strumming of an acoustic guitar, barely audible from his own patio. He'd dismissed it then, chuckling to himself about the quirks of suburban life. He was a city boy, after all, used to anonymity, not the hawk-eyed scrutiny of a neighborhood watch of one. Now, as he slipped into the cool embrace of the water, the world narrowed to the gentle lapping against his skin, the muted chirping of cicadas, and the feeling of weightlessness. He floated on his back, eyes closed, letting the sun warm his face. The water was a balm, washing away the anxieties of deadlines and the subtle tension that had begun to build from Mrs. Henderson's watchful presence. He imagined new forms. For his sculpture, metal ribbons twisting around negative space, reaching for the light. This was his space, his freedom. Suddenly, a splintering crack echoed through the quiet afternoon, louder than any cicada. It was a sound of wood tearing, stressed and giving way. Alex's eyes snapped open. He sat up in the water, treading lazily, scanning the fence line. The old, weathered planks that had separated his property from Mrs. Henderson's for decades were sagging. One of the main posts, rotted through at the base, had finally given up the ghost. A section of the fence, about 10 feet long, tipped inward, revealing not just Mrs. Henderson's pristine rose garden, but Mrs. Henderson herself. She was kneeling by a prize-winning bush, secateurs in hand, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat that did little to soften the severe lines of her face. Her head snapped up at the sound, her eyes, usually narrowed, widening in surprise. Then, they fell on Alex. He was sitting upright in the middle of his pool, completely nude. For a moment, a profound, almost comical silence descended, broken only by the gentle slosh of the pool water against Alex's chest. Mrs. Henderson's face, already taut, began a grotesque transformation. Her jaw dropped, then clamped shut. Her eyes, normally a steely gray, seemed to darken, like storm clouds gathering. A flush of angry crimson climbed her neck, spreading rapidly across her cheeks. The secateurs clattered to the ground, forgotten. "You!" she shrieked, her voice thin and piercing, ripping through the afternoon quiet. It was not a question, but an accusation, laced with a venom Alex had never encountered outside of B-movies. "You pervert! What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Alex blinked, startled out of his poolside reverie. His first instinct was confusion, then a wave of burning embarrassment. He quickly ducked lower in the water, trying to cover himself, though the water only offered so much concealment. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry, the fence just gave way. I didn't realize. I thought I was private." His words tumbled out, a mix of genuine apology and flustered explanation. He felt his own face redden. This was mortifying, but his words were lost in a torrent of her outrage. She scrambled to her feet, her movements jerky, her hand gesturing wildly towards him as if to ward off a plague. "Private? Private? This is a public display of depravity, in broad daylight. Children live on this street. What kind of degenerate are you?" Her voice escalated with each accusation, rising to a hysterical pitch that vibrated with raw indignation. "This is an outrage. An abomination. Get dressed this instant, you exhibitionist." Alex tried again, his voice strained. "Mrs. Henderson, please. It was an accident. I'll fix the fence immediately. I just got in the pool. I didn't know it was broken." He gestured helplessly towards the splintered wood, hoping to appeal to some shred of reason. But reason had clearly abandoned Mrs. Henderson. She was pacing now, a furious hummingbird, her arms rigid at her sides. "Accident? Accident? Your moral turpitude is no accident, young man. This is exactly what's wrong with this neighborhood, with this world. No respect, no decency, just filth." She was practically spitting the words, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that seemed to consume her. Her hands clenched and unclenched, as if struggling to contain an explosive internal pressure. Alex felt a cold dread begin to coil in his stomach. This wasn't just about a broken fence or a momentary lapse in privacy. This was something far more visceral for her, a perceived attack on her ordered world, her moral code. He knew arguing was useless. He needed to get out of the pool, get dressed, and put an end to this horrifying spectacle. "I'm getting out, Mrs. Henderson," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm going inside." He began to paddle towards the shallow end, his movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to provoke her further. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes, still wide and enraged, darted around as if searching for a weapon, something to truly convey the depth of her disgust. Then, a chilling change came over her face. The raw hysteria was replaced by a grim, determined set of her jaw. Her eyes narrowed, focusing, not on him, but on the back door of her house. You think you can just desecrate my sightline and walk away? She hissed, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier shrieks. You think this is acceptable? Before Alex could respond, before he could even register the shift in her demeanor, she pivoted sharply and stomped towards her back door. The screen door slammed shut behind her with a violent bang that made Alex flinch. He watched the empty doorway bewildered, a terrible sense of unease washing over him. Was she calling the police? His mind raced, imagining the humiliation of explaining this to an officer. He just wanted to disappear into his house. He was halfway out of the pool, dripping water onto the warm concrete, when the screen door burst open again. Mrs. Henderson reappeared, but this time, she wasn't empty-handed. In her trembling grasp, clutched tight against her chest, was a small, silver handgun. It glinted ominously in the sunlight, reflecting a harsh, sterile light. Alex froze, a primal fear seizing him. His heart stopped, then hammered against his ribs with a desperate urgency. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. People didn't pull guns over broken fences and accidental nudity. Not in this quiet, manicured. "Suburb! Get back!" she screamed, her voice shaking, but holding a terrifying new edge of conviction. She raised the gun, her arm wobbling slightly, but the barrel was unmistakable, pointing directly at him. "You will learn! You will learn! What decency means!" He saw the wildness in her eyes, the complete loss of control. It wasn't just anger, any. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and muted urgency. Alex lay on the stretcher, his arm throbbing a relentless rhythm, the initial shock slowly giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The paramedics were efficient, their movements, practiced and precise, cleaning the wound, bandaging it snugly, asking questions he answered mechanically. Fragments, that's what they called it. Not a direct hit, but a ricochet, a piece of the bullet or something it had struck. Lucky, they said. Lucky to be alive. The word felt hollow, echoing the surreal horror of what had just happened. At the hospital, the routine of emergency care was a strange comfort. Doctors with calm, reassuring voices examined his arm. The gash cleaner now, less alarming. It was deep enough to require stitches, but thankfully, no major arteries or nerves were severed. They gave him a tetanus shot and a prescription for antibiotics and painkillers. The physical pain was manageable. It was the chilling replay of Mrs. Henderson's face, the glint of the gun, the deafening crack that truly haunted him. Detective Reynolds was waiting for him when he emerged from the examination room, a tall, lean man with kind but weary eyes. He introduced himself, his voice low and steady, pulling Alex away from the bustling ER into a small, private consultation room. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow on the detective's notepad and the half-empty coffee cup on the table. "Mr. Petrov," Reynolds began, his gaze direct, "I understand you've had quite an afternoon. We appreciate your cooperation. Can you walk me through exactly what happened, in your own words, from the moment the fence broke?" Alex took a deep breath, the antiseptic smell of the hospital clinging to him. He recounted the events, slowly at first, then with increasing clarity as the memories solidified. The broken fence, his nakedness, Mrs. Henderson's immediate fury, her escalating accusations, the chilling moment she left and returned with the gun, his desperate dive, the shot, the pain, the sirens. He tried to convey the sheer, unbelievable escalation, the speed with which a tranquil afternoon had devolved into a nightmare. Reynolds listened patiently, nodding occasionally, scribbling notes. He didn't interrupt, didn't show judgment, just absorbed the narrative. When Alex finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "And you're certain she aimed it directly at you?" Reynolds asked, his voice even. "Yes," Alex said, his voice firm. Absolutely. She screamed, "Get back!" And then, "You will learn what decency means." And then she raised it and fired. I saw her finger on the trigger. There's no doubt. Did she make any other threats? Any previous altercations? Alex hesitated, then recounted the note about the ambient noise and her general demeanor. She's always been very particular, very private, very judgmental, but nothing like this. Never anything violent. Just small, petty things. Reynolds nodded, stroking his chin. Mrs. Henderson has been taken into custody. She's being questioned now. We recovered the firearm. It was registered to her deceased husband. She has no prior record of violence, but... Well, the evidence is pretty damning, Mr. Petrov. We have multiple witness statements corroborating the gunshot, the broken fence, and her general state of agitation. And, of course, your injury. What will happen to her? Alex asked, surprised by the question. He wasn't sure he wanted revenge, just justice. For the madness to make sense. She's currently being held on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment, Reynolds stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Given the nature of the incident, the injury, and the clear intent to use the weapon, it's a serious charge. The DA will decide whether to pursue additional charges. She'll likely face a grand jury indictment soon. A wave of exhaustion washed over Alex. The reality of it all, the legal machinery now grinding into motion, was almost as overwhelming as the shooting itself. He was the victim in a criminal case. His quiet suburban life had been shattered, and his neighbor, a seemingly innocuous, elderly woman, was now facing a prison sentence. "Thank you, Detective," Alex said, rubbing his temples. "Is there anything else you need from me tonight?" "Not tonight, Mr. Petrov. Get some rest. We'll be in touch. We'll also be arranging for an officer to periodically patrol your street for the next few days, just as a precaution. Your safety is our priority." Alex returned home to a scene that felt alien and exposed. Yellow police tape cordoned off the section of the fence, flapping gently in the evening breeze. A faint outline where Mrs. Henderson's gun had lain was visible. On the manicured grass, his pool, once a sanctuary, now looked like a crime scene. The water still stained faintly pink near the shallow end. He showered, carefully avoiding his bandaged arm, and then collapsed onto his couch, too wired to sleep. The silence of his house, usually comforting, was now oppressive, filled with the echoes of the afternoon. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the contact for his sister, Sarah. She'd always been his rock, his sounding board. But how did you even begin to explain this? "My neighbor shot me for skinny dipping." It sounded like a twisted joke. He opted for a text instead, brief and to the point. "Emergency. Call me when you can. I'm okay, but something crazy happened." Within minutes, his phone rang. Sarah's voice, usually calm and measured, was laced with panic. "Alex, what's wrong? Are you really okay? What happened?" He recounted the story again, this time with more emotion, the raw fear and disbelief spilling out. Sarah listened, her gasps and exclamations punctuating his narrative. "Oh my God, Alex, that's insane. That's attempted murder. Are you sure you're okay? You need to call a lawyer. Immediately. This woman is clearly unhinged." I know, Alex sighed, rubbing his arm. "The detective said they arrested her, aggravated assault. It all feels so surreal. One minute I'm floating in my pool, the next I'm dodging bullets." "And you were naked?" Sarah asked, a note of disbelief, then a sudden burst of laughter, slightly hysterical. "Oh, Alex, only you. This is going to be the most ridiculous news story ever. Naked man shot by moralistic neighbor." Despite the horror, a weak chuckle escaped him. "Yeah, well, it's not so funny when you're the one bleeding." "No, of course not," Sarah quickly sobered. "But seriously, you need legal advice. You're a victim, and you'll have a lot of decisions to make. And you need to protect yourself." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Alex hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda Chen who specialized in personal injury and civil rights cases. Brenda immediately filed a restraining order against Mrs. Henderson, even though she was in custody, and began investigating the extent of the damage. The bullet hadn't just grazed Alex's arm. It had splintered the old fence and then ricocheted off his pool deck, leaving a noticeable gouge in the expensive concrete. The news of the incident spread through the quiet suburb like wildfire. Local news vans, drawn by the sensational headline, parked on the street. Neighbors who had previously offered polite nods or wary glances now approached Alex with concerned expressions, some offering casseroles, others just wide-eyed curiosity. The cul-de-sac's meticulously maintained facade had been irrevocably cracked, revealing the raw, ugly underbelly of simmering tensions. Mrs. Henderson, or rather Karen, as she was quickly dubbed by the media, became an overnight sensation, a symbol of suburban rage and misguided moral zealotry. Social media exploded with memes, jokes, and outrage. Her pristine lawn and meticulously trimmed hedges became the backdrop for late-night comedy sketches. Alex, however, found little humor in it. His sleep was plagued by nightmares. The flash of the gun, the sound of the shot, Mrs. Henderson's enraged face. He felt exposed, violated, even in his own home. He started pulling the blinds, closing curtains. The open, artistic life he envisioned for himself here suddenly constrained by fear. He stopped going into his backyard, the pool now a reminder of the trauma. His sculpture, half finished, stood gathering dust. A week later, Mrs. Henderson was formally indicted by a grand jury on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and criminal damage to property. Her bail was set high, reflecting the seriousness of the charges. The initial arraignment was brief, Mrs. Henderson appearing pale and frail, her eyes downcast. She pleaded not guilty, a standard legal maneuver. Brenda explained the legal process to Alex. "This will likely go to trial, Alex. She's facing significant prison time if convicted. And we'll be pursuing a civil lawsuit for damages, medical bills, emotional distress, damage to your property, and punitive damages." "Punitive damages?" Alex asked, unfamiliar with the term. "To punish her for her egregious conduct and to deter others from similar actions," Brenda explained. "This wasn't just an accident. It was an intentional act of violence. We need to send a clear message." The mention of punitive damages, of financial retribution, felt oddly unsettling to Alex. He wasn't motivated by money. He just wanted the fear to dissipate, the sense of peace he'd moved here for to return. But he also understood Brenda's logic. This couldn't be dismissed lightly. Meanwhile, the broken fence remained, a stark reminder. Brenda advised against fixing it immediately. Explaining it was crucial evidence for the criminal and civil cases. The yellow tape remained, a constant visual wound in the suburban landscape. One afternoon, a letter arrived, not from Mrs. Henderson's lawyer, but from a real estate agent. It was a formal offer to Pew. The silence that descended after the gavel struck, after Mrs. Henderson was led away, was not one of peace. For Alex, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of an aftermath, thick with unspoken implications. The media, having feasted on the sensational trial, slowly began to dissipate, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of flashbulbs and news anchors' voices. The Karen saga for the public was largely over. For Alex, it had only just begun. The 7-year sentence felt both just and strangely, disproportionately heavy. Justice, yes, but at what cost? He hadn't sought to ruin a woman's life, merely to understand how his had been so violently interrupted. Yet her actions had set in motion an unstoppable chain of events. Brenda Chen, his lawyer, was triumphant. "This is a clear win, Alex," she announced, her voice brisk, a few days after the sentencing. "The criminal conviction strengthens our civil suit immensely. There's no question of liability. Now we pursue the damages." The civil suit began to dominate Alex's life. Discovery, depositions, negotiations. He learned the intricate dance of the legal system, a dance far less dramatic than the criminal trial, but equally taxing. Mrs. Henderson's remaining assets, already depleted by her criminal defense, were now fair game. He wasn't motivated by greed, but by a chilling sense of necessity. The trauma, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety in his own backyard, they demanded a reckoning. The towering 16-foot fence, erected by Fencing Solutions LLC, now stood as a permanent, imposing fixture. It stretched along the entire perimeter of what was once Mrs. Henderson's property, a dark wooden wall that blocked out the morning sun from a significant portion of Alex's yard. His once bright pool was now often shaded, its waters cooler, more somber. His half-finished sculpture, once destined to capture light, seemed to shrink in the encroaching gloom. He tried to resume his life, to return to his art. But the creative flow, once so natural, now felt fractured. The fear, though less immediate, had settled into a persistent unease. He found himself constantly scanning the fence line, listening for sounds, his senses hyper-alert. The comfort of his home had been tainted. Neighbors who had initially offered sympathy and casseroles now approached him with a different kind of curiosity. Whispers followed him at the grocery store. He was that guy, the one who got shot. The reason Mrs. Henderson was in jail, the catalyst for the giant fence. He wasn't a victim to them, but a spectacle. The privacy he had once cherished in his new home was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable notoriety. Sarah, his sister, visited often. She saw the change in him, the way he flinched at loud noises, the shadows under his eyes. "You're not sleeping, Alex," she'd say gently. "This isn't over for you, is it?" "No," he admitted one evening, staring out at the imposing fence, a black monolith against the twilight sky. "It's like the fence is a barrier, but it's also a constant reminder. And the lawsuit, it just keeps it all alive." "You need closure, then," Sarah said, her voice soft. "And maybe a new perspective on this place. It's not just a crime scene anymore. It's still your home." One afternoon, Alex was attempting to work on his sculpture. The metal felt cold, unresponsive in his hands. He kept glancing at the fence, its dark wood absorbing the light. He remembered the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, the way Mrs. Henderson's rage had twisted her face. He still struggled with the idea of her in prison, an elderly woman behind bars. Was this truly what he wanted? His thoughts were interrupted by a new sound from next door. Not the familiar hum of construction, which had finished weeks ago, but a distant, muffled thud, followed by the faint sound of voices. The Fencing Solutions LLC property, now with its towering barrier, was clearly being prepared for resale. He'd seen for sale signs go up a few days prior. He pushed the thought aside, trying to focus on his work, but the sounds persisted, louder now. A new, unfamiliar rhythm of life was beginning next door, behind the Great Wall. A few weeks later, Brenda called him with news about the civil suit. "Alex, we've reached a settlement with Mrs. Henderson's estate." Alex felt a tremor of anticipation. "And it's substantial," Brenda stated, her voice formal. "Enough to cover all your medical bills, property damages, significant compensation for emotional distress, and a good sum for punitive damages. It's a very favorable outcome." He listened, the numbers washing over him. It was a large sum, far more than he'd anticipated. He felt no elation, only a hollow sense of finality. The money wouldn't erase the nightmares, or bring back the sense of unburdened peace. It was simply the official financial acknowledgement of his pain. "So, it's over?" he asked, his voice quiet. "For the most part," Brenda confirmed. There's paperwork to sign, and then the funds will be transferred. You can start to move on, Alex. This is the last major hurdle." He hung up the phone, the receiver heavy in his hand. Over. The word felt like a lie. How could it be over? When the wall still stood, a dark sentinel against his sky? How could it be over when the memory of the gunshot still echoed in his quiet moments? The new residents moved in next door a few weeks after the civil suit was settled. Alex saw them, only as fleeting glimpses. A young couple, perhaps in their early 30s with 2 small children. Their presence was a stark contrast to Mrs. Henderson's solitary existence. He heard the faint sounds of children's laughter, the murmur of adult voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Life behind the wall. He wondered if they knew the story of the fence, the violent origin of their extreme privacy. He imagined them enjoying the seclusion, unaware of the rage and fear that had birthed their towering barrier. He had deliberately avoided meeting them, not wanting to share the grim history of their shared boundary. He didn't want to be that guy to them either. One breezy afternoon, as Alex was attempting to sketch new designs for his sculpture, a high-pitched cry pierced the air from next door. It was a child's wail, sharp and distressed. He paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. Then another cry, followed by a woman's frantic voice. "Oh no, Jasper, are you okay?" A moment of tense silence, then the distinct sound of something, heavy hitting the ground, followed by a faint whimper. Alex felt a surge of irrational anxiety. What was happening? He tried to dismiss it, to focus on his art. It was their business, their private matters behind their imposing wall. But the anxiety gnawed at him. The wails continued, growing louder, more frantic, clearly indicating a child in genuine distress. He finally couldn't ignore it. With a sigh of resignation, he walked towards the towering fence. There was no way to see over it, of course. He pressed his ear against the rough wood, trying to discern what was happening. He heard muffled crying, a woman's hushed attempts to soothe, and then a man's voice, frustrated. "It's bleeding pretty badly, honey. We need to get him to the urgent care. This stupid wall is impossible." Wall? Impossible? What did that mean? Alex's curiosity and a faint sense of lingering responsibility pricked at him. He hesitated, then walked quickly to his side gate, opened it, and walked onto the sidewalk, approaching the front of the new neighbor's house. As he got closer, he saw a woman standing anxiously by the front door, cradling a small boy, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, who was sobbing uncontrollably. The boy's face was red and streaked with tears, and his knee, peeking out from under his shorts, had a dark spreading stain of blood. Next to them, a man was visibly frustrated, holding a small, brightly colored plastic ball. The woman looked up as Alex approached, her eyes wide with concern, then registering surprise at his presence. "Is everything okay?" Alex asked, his voice gentle. "I heard the crying from my yard. Is the little one hurt?" The woman, her brow furrowed with worry, nodded. "He fell, tripped over a loose stone near the fence. His knee's pretty scraped up, and it's bleeding a lot. We're just trying to get to the car to go to urgent care, but we can't find the keys. My husband just put them down somewhere and we're having a total meltdown." She gestured helplessly at the frantic scene. The man, clearly exasperated, ran a hand through his hair. "This new fence, it's so disorienting. Everything looks the same back there. I swear I put the keys on the patio table, but I can't find them anywhere. We've been running in circles." Alex felt a flicker of realization. The wall. It wasn't just a visual barrier. It was a labyrinth for those living within its confines. The uniformity of the 16-foot panels, the lack of landmarks, could easily confuse someone, especially in a moment of panic. "I might be able to help," Alex said, a thought forming. "I have a ladder. If the keys are on your patio, I can probably see over the fence from my side. Your patio is usually visible from my second-story window." The couple exchanged a look of bewildered gratitude. Would you? That would be amazing, the woman exclaimed, her voice filled with desperate hope. Of course, Alex said. Just point me to where you think they might be. He hurried back to his garage, grabbed his tall extension ladder, and wheeled it into his backyard. He positioned it carefully against the imposing wooden wall, directly opposite where he estimated their patio was. With a grunt, he extended the ladder, climbing steadily, his bandaged arm aching slightly. As he ascended, the vast expanse of the new neighbor's backyard slowly came into view over the top of the towering wall. It was indeed disorienting. The solid wooden panels created a strange enclosed atmosphere, blocking out much. The brief human exchange with Sarah and Mark, the new neighbors, had chipped away at Alex's self-imposed isolation, like sunlight finding a crack in the towering wall that now defined his backyard. It was a fleeting moment, a shared vulnerability, over a scraped knee and lost keys, but it lingered, a subtle warmth against the cold weight of the trauma. He still flinched at sudden noises, still found himself instinctively scanning the oppressive height of the fence, but the constant hum of anxiety had lessened, replaced by a quiet curiosity about the lives unfolding behind the barrier. The civil settlement, though substantial, sat in his bank account, an untouched testament to his ordeal. He found no joy in the money, only a vague sense of unease. It felt like compensation for something that could never truly be compensated. The loss of his peace, the violation of his home. He tried to invest it, to make it something productive, but his mind recoiled from the practicalities. The money felt tainted, a heavy burden rather than a liberation. His sculpture, the abstract metal forms that once seemed to dance with the light, now sat forlorn in the perpetual shade cast by the 16-foot wall. The direct sun, so vital for the gleam and shadow play he envisioned, was largely gone from that corner of his yard. He'd tried to move the pieces, to reorient them, but it felt like forcing a square peg into a round hole. The inspiration that had once flowed so freely had become a trickle, blocked by the sheer, unyielding presence of the barrier. His studio, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage, defined by the enormous, looming shadow. Sarah, his sister, noticed. "You haven't touched your art in weeks, Alex," she observed one afternoon, watching him stare blankly at his unfinished work. "That's not like you. Is it the fence? The light?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's everything, Sarah. The light is different, yes. But it's more than that. It's like the energy of the space has changed. It feels heavy, confined. How do you create something that celebrates openness when you're surrounded by a fortress? You adapt," Sarah said simply, her gaze firm. "Or you challenge it. That wall is there. You can let it define you, or you can find a way to make it part of something new. Maybe your art needs to change with your environment, or maybe you need to leave." The thought of leaving struck him with a surprising force. Leave his dream home? The place he'd invested everything into? But the idea, once unthinkable, now held a faint, alluring glimmer of possibility. A fresh start, a chance to shed the naked man shot by Karen label that still seemed to cling to him like a burr. Days turned into weeks. He didn't actively seek out his new neighbors, Mark and Sarah, but their presence was undeniable. He'd hear Jasper's delighted giggles echoing over the wall, the rhythmic thud of a basketball against their solid new driveway, the distant murmur of dinner conversations. Their life, vibrant and normal, was a stark contrast to his quiet, contemplative, and now somewhat melancholic existence. He found himself, almost unconsciously, listening to their rhythms, a small part of him comforted by the ordinary sounds of family life. One sunny Saturday morning, a soft tap came from his side gate. It was Mark, holding a small plate piled with freshly baked cookies. "Hey, Alex," Mark said, a friendly smile on his face. "Sarah baked too many cookies. Thought you might appreciate some. And hey, thanks again for the ladder incident. Jasper's knee is all healed up thanks to your quick thinking." Alex felt a genuine smile spread across his face, a rare occurrence these days. "Mark, that's really kind of you. Come in, please." Mark stepped into the backyard, his eyes immediately drawn to Alex's unfinished sculpture, then lingering on the towering fence. "Wow," he murmured, looking up at the imposing wood. "That thing is something else. And your art. It's really interesting." They talked for a while about the challenges of moving, the surprising amount of space behind the wall, and the quirks of the neighborhood. Mark, a software engineer, confessed to finding the sheer privacy of the fence a novelty, if a little claustrophobic at times. "It's great for the kids," he explained, "but sometimes it feels like we're in our own little world. We can't even see over it, let alone into your yard." He chuckled, a genuine easy laugh. Alex found himself relaxing, sharing some of his struggles with his art, the impact of the altered light. Mark listened intently, offering thoughtful, if not always practical, suggestions. The conversation was easy, devoid of the awkwardness he'd anticipated. "You know," Mark said, looking around Alex's yard, "we were actually thinking of putting in a small garden bed along that side of our fence, just where it meets your pool deck, but it's hard to tell how much sun it'll get with the wall. Do you ever get much direct light there in the afternoon?" Alex frowned, considering. "Not really, since the wall went up. That side is mostly shade now. In the summer, maybe a little direct sun right around noon, but it shifts quickly." Mark sighed. "Figured as much. It really does block a lot of light, doesn't it?" He looked up at the wall, then back at Alex, a curious expression on his face. "Have you ever considered doing anything with the wall itself? From your side, I mean?" Alex blinked. "With the wall? Like what?" "I don't know," Mark shrugged. "Climbing plants? A mural? Something to break up the monotony? You're an artist. Maybe you could use it. Turn it into something else." The idea, so simple yet so profound, landed like a small, unexpected pebble in the calm pond of Alex's stagnant thoughts. Use the wall, not fight it, not ignore it, but incorporate it. The oppressive barrier, the symbol of his trauma, could be transformed. It was a radical shift in perspective. I hadn't considered that," Alex admitted, his mind already beginning to race with possibilities. A vertical garden, perhaps, or a series of light installations that would play with the newly created shadows, or even a new kind of sculpture, designed specifically for a vertical plane, interacting with the imposed darkness. "Well, just a thought," Mark said, smiling. "Anyway, I should get back, but it was good talking, and thanks again for the keys." After Mark left, Alex walked over to the wall, touching its rough, dark surface. It was still a monument to Mrs. Henderson's rage, but now a tiny crack of light had appeared in its formidable facade. The creative spark, long dormant, flickered to life. A few days later, a strange incident occurred. Alex was sketching ideas for a wall-mounted sculpture, a series of geometric shapes that would play with the limited sunlight, when he heard a faint scratching sound coming from the base of the towering fence, near the point where the original break had occurred. It was persistent, almost rhythmic. He walked closer, frowning. It sounded like something digging. He knelt down, peering at the bottom edge of the wall. There, nestled almost imperceptibly against the dark wood, was a small, crudely fashioned hole about the size of a fist. And through the hole, a pair of bright, inquisitive eyes stared back at him. It was Jasper, the neighbor's little boy. He was on his hands and knees, a small plastic shovel beside him, looking immensely pleased with himself. "Hi," Jasper whispered, his voice muffled. "I made a tunnel! My ball went under!" Alex felt a surge of conflicting emotions, annoyance at the breach in the imposing barrier, but also a strange amusement. The very wall built for ultimate privacy was already being undermined by the relentless curiosity of a child. "Hey, Jasper," Alex said, keeping his voice calm. "That's a pretty good tunnel. But we really shouldn't be digging under the fence, okay? It's important to keep the wall strong." Jasper's face fell. "But my ball!" Just then he heard Sarah's voice, a little panicked, from the other side of the wall. "Jasper! Where are you, sweetie? Jasper!" Alex quickly looked at the boy. "Okay, tell you what, I'll help you get your ball. But then no more digging, all right?" Jasper nodded eagerly. Alex reached through the small hole and retrieved a bright red bouncy ball, handing it back to the boy. "Thank you," Jasper chirped, his face lighting up. Sarah then appeared, her eyes wide with relief when she saw Jasper. She spotted Alex kneeling by the hole. Her eyes widened further, a blush spreading across her cheeks. "Oh my goodness, Alex. Jasper, what did you do? I'm so sorry. He's always digging everything up." "It's okay, Sarah," Alex said, standing up. "No harm done. Just a small tunnel. We got his ball back." Sarah sighed, clearly embarrassed. "This wall is really something, isn't it? Hard to keep track of them sometimes. I should have known he'd find a way." She looked at the small hole, then at Alex, a knowing look passing between them. The wall wasn't as impenetrable as it seemed, and perhaps that was a good thing. The next few weeks were a period of intense internal shifts for Alex. He began to draw designs for wall-mounted sculptures, intricate pieces that would interact with the shifting light and shadows, turning the oppressive barrier into a canvas. He started researching vertical gardens, envisioning lush greenery cascading down the dark wood. The fence, once a symbol of his trauma, was slowly becoming a source of artistic inspiration. He also found himself spending more time with Mark and Sarah. They'd often meet at the front of their houses, chatting about neighborhood gossip, sharing gardening tips, or just discussing their days. Jasper and his younger sister Lily would often be playing in their yard, their laughter now a welcome sound, a sign of life and normalcy. Alex found himself offering to help Mark with small repairs, or Sarah with a challenging plant. The shared beau. Mrs. Henderson was gone. The news, delivered with such quiet finality by Detective Reynolds, settled over Alex not as a shockwave, but as a slow, profound shift in the air. The heavy, persistent hum of conflict that had pervaded his life since. The gunshot had finally, truly, faded into silence. There was no elation, no sense of triumph, only an unexpected, quiet release. The physical wall remained, a dark, imposing presence, but the emotional wall within him, built from fear and resentment, began to crumble. He walked over to his pool, the turquoise water still and inviting under the afternoon sun, though the new wall cast a long, cool shadow across its surface. He hadn't swum in it since that day, the memory too visceral, too painful. Now, as he looked at the water, he felt a faint stirring, not of dread, but of a forgotten longing. The next few weeks were a period of intense creative resurgence. With Mrs. Henderson's living specter finally lifted, Alex found himself able to look at the 16-foot wall not as a monument to her rage, but as an enormous, blank canvas. The oppressive shadow, once a source of artistic paralysis, now became an intriguing element, a challenge to integrate into his vision. He began sketching furiously, designs flowing from his mind with a freedom he hadn't experienced in months. He conceived of a series of interlocking metal panels that would form a colossal, abstract mural against the dark wood. These pieces wouldn't just reflect light, they would interact with the shifting shadows, casting intricate patterns that would change throughout the day, transforming the wall into a dynamic living artwork. He also planned a vertical garden, a lush cascade of greenery that would soften the harsh lines, breathing life and color into the rigid barrier. His initial sculpture, still gathering dust in the corner, suddenly seemed irrelevant, a relic of a past he was determined to leave behind. His art, like his life, needed to adapt, to evolve. Mark and Sarah, his neighbors, noticed the change in him. He was more relaxed, more open, his eyes holding a renewed spark. They'd often find him in his backyard, measuring, sketching, or meticulously cleaning the tools he'd neglected for so long. One afternoon, Sarah called over the fence, her voice cheerful. "Alex, we're having a little BBQ tonight, just us and the kids. Would you like to join? No pressure, just a casual get-together." Alex hesitated for a moment, then found himself smiling. "I'd love to, Sarah. Thank you." That evening, for the first time since moving in, Alex stepped into his neighbor's backyard. It was a revelation. The interior of the 16-foot wall, which he had only ever seen from his side, was painted a cheerful, light beige, making the space feel surprisingly bright despite the imposing height. Jasper and Lily, their laughter echoing, chased each other around a brightly colored swing set. The air hummed with the comforting sounds of family life. Mark was grilling burgers, the scent of charcoal mingling with the sweet smell of blooming flowers. Sarah offered him a drink, her smile warm and genuine. They talked about their day, about the kids, about mundane, ordinary things that felt profoundly precious after the chaos he had endured. "So," Mark said, gesturing towards the towering fence, "we noticed you've been out here a lot more lately. Got some big plans for this wall, do you?" Alex nodded, feeling a surge of enthusiasm. "I do, actually. I'm thinking of a large-scale metal sculpture, something that plays with the light and the shadows, and a vertical garden, to transform it, you know?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, Alex, that's wonderful. That wall is just so bare. It needs something, and your art is beautiful." Jasper, who had been listening intently, piped up, "Are you going to make another hole for my ball?" Everyone laughed. "Maybe not a hole, Jasper," Alex chuckled, "but maybe a path for your ball to roll down." As the evening wore on, the boundaries between their properties, once a source of conflict and isolation, began to blur. The shared wall, born of violence and outrage, was slowly becoming a canvas for connection, a testament to unexpected community. Alex found a surprising comfort in their presence, in the shared space, however physically segmented. The local news, having milked the Karen story dry, moved on to other sensational headlines. The wider world forgot Mrs. Henderson and the naked man in the pool. But in this small cul-de-sac, the consequences of that single, violent act continued to ripple, changing lives in unexpected ways. Alex began working on his wall project with renewed vigor. He commissioned specialized tools, sourced unique metals, and spent hours meticulously planning the irrigation system for the vertical garden. His studio, once a place of stagnation, was now buzzing with activity. He still worked long hours, but now, his exhaustion was the satisfying kind, born of creation, not trauma. The first phase of the project was the vertical garden. He built a grid system against the lower half of the wall, painstakingly installing drip irrigation lines and planting pockets. Soon, vibrant green foliage began to sprout, then cascade, softening the harsh lines of the dark wood. Flowers bloomed, adding splashes of color. The wall, once a symbol of confinement, began to exude life. Next came the metal sculpture. He worked in segments, welding intricate abstract forms that shimmered and reflected. He designed them to cast dancing shadows that would shift with the sun's arc, turning the wall into a dynamic sundial of art. It was his most ambitious project yet, a powerful statement of resilience and transformation. Neighbors, no longer. Just curious, now stopped by, genuinely impressed. They admired the garden, the burgeoning sculpture. Alex explained his vision, the concept of turning a barrier into a canvas. They saw not just an artist, but a survivor, someone who had faced darkness and found a way to create light. The final piece was installed on a warm autumn afternoon, the last panel of gleaming metal bolted into place. Alex stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at his creation. The vertical garden was flourishing, a lush tapestry of green. Above it, his metal sculpture rose, catching the late afternoon sun, casting a magnificent, intricate shadow that stretched across his pool and yard. The wall, Mrs. Henderson's wall, was no longer just a wall. It was a masterpiece. He knew that the physical scar on his arm would always remain, a faint line on his skin. The emotional scars, too, would never fully disappear. But as he stood there, looking at the transformed wall, at the vibrancy of his garden and the dynamic play of light and shadow created by his art, he felt something profound shift within him. The fear, the anger, the haunting echoes of the past. They hadn't vanished entirely, but they had receded, becoming background noise to the new symphony of his life. His gaze drifted to the now familiar sounds coming from next door. Jasper's joyous shouts, Lily's babbling, the quiet murmur of Mark and Sarah's conversation. He walked to the side gate, opened it, and found Mark waving from his patio. "It's incredible, Alex," Mark called out, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Absolutely stunning. You've transformed it." Alex smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached his eyes. He looked back at his backyard, at the pool, at the towering, beautiful wall. He had come here seeking peace and found violence. He had sought privacy and found notoriety. But in the ashes of that conflict, he had found something unexpected: resilience, connection, and a new purpose. Mrs. Henderson had lost her gun, her fence, and her freedom. But in her unwitting destruction, she had, ironically, given Alex the canvas he needed to truly build his own. He knew now that his home was not just a property, but a testament to how even the deepest wounds could be transformed into profound beauty. He walked towards his pool, finally, truly, ready to dive in again.